Black woman was arrested, without a word. Then her backup stepped out and left. Everyone in shock. The moment the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, silence fell over the bustling downtown sidewalk like a dropped curtain. The officers didn't ask for her name, didn't read her rights, didn't explain a thing. They simply grabbed the tall black woman in the gray blazer and snapped cold metal around her wrists. "No sudden moves," barked Officer Malloy, his jaw tight and voice edged with something darker than authority. "You fit the description." "I fit the description?" she said calmly, barely blinking. Her tone was firm but unnervingly even, as if she'd already predicted this moment. "That's all you need to drag someone off the street?" Malloy didn't answer. His partner, Officer Kelsey, looked vaguely uncomfortable, but said nothing. A few pedestrians slowed down, their eyes darting between their phones and the unfolding scene, but no one stepped in. The woman didn't yell, didn't struggle. She stood with a posture that radiated something subtle yet powerful: confidence, dignity, danger even, but not the kind you cuff for. Her name was Celeste Monroe, and if anyone had cared enough to ask, they'd have learned she was a decorated former Army intelligence analyst turned civil rights attorney. But in that moment, to the two white officers, she was just a black woman in a suit walking too calmly past a jewelry store that had reported a shoplifting incident an hour earlier. One witness tried to speak up. A young Latino man in a UPS uniform edged forward. "Hey, I just saw her come out of that building across the street. That's a law office, man. She didn't even go near the store." Malloy glared at him. "You trying to interfere with a police investigation?" "No, but you can file a statement later. Keep moving." Celeste's eyes met the delivery man's. She gave him the smallest nod, an unspoken thank you. Then she turned her gaze forward again, resolute, as they guided her to the cruiser. Inside the squad car, her wrists still bound, Celeste kept her breathing slow and steady. She was already building the case in her mind, every word they'd said, every action they'd taken. But she knew this wouldn't be won from the back of a police cruiser. At the precinct, she was booked with robotic indifference. No phone call, no charges explained. They logged her in as Jane Doe, pending verification. "You're gonna be real sorry about this," said a young black female officer in the background to no one in particular. "Y'all just don't know who you messing with." "What did you say, Officer Taryn?" Malloy snapped, overhearing. "I said you didn't even check her ID. That's basic. I ain't saying more than that." She refused to identify herself. Celeste turned her head. "I didn't refuse. I was never asked." Malloy ignored her. As they placed her in the holding cell, Celeste sat on the bench, silent. She didn't shout for a lawyer. She didn't make a scene. She simply waited, like a chess master letting a lesser opponent overplay his hand. But what happened next wasn't in anyone's script. 37 minutes after her arrest, the precinct's front door slammed open. A man in a sharply cut charcoal suit stormed through, trailed by two sharply dressed federal agents. His presence was explosive, controlled, precise, and absolutely commanding. Every cop in the room turned. Some stiffened instinctively. Others shrank. "Where is she?" he demanded. Malloy stepped forward. "Sir, you can't—" The man held up his badge. It gleamed under the fluorescence. Derek Cole, U.S. Deputy Attorney General. And he wasn't alone. The two agents behind him flashed federal credentials, both from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. "Agent Ramirez, locate Celeste Monroe, now." The room froze. "Did he say Celeste Monroe?" one officer whispered. Malloy's mouth fell open. "You're telling me you arrested Celeste Monroe, the attorney leading the class action lawsuit against the NYPD?" Ramirez asked, his voice sharp and incredulous. The silence that followed could have shattered glass. Derek stepped closer to Malloy. You cuffed her on a public street, without probable cause. No Miranda, no call, and you logged her as Jane Doe? We thought she was. She matched a report. I know what you thought, but let me be very clear. You just arrested the lead counsel in a federal case targeting your department. She was on her way to file evidence at the federal courthouse. You have no idea the storm you just walked into. Ramirez and the other agent disappeared down the corridor, heading toward the holding cells. Malloy looked like the ground had just dropped out from under him. Officer Taryn watched, arms folded. Tried to tell y'all. When the agents returned with Celeste, uncuffed and composed, her expression was unreadable. Derek met her at the entrance to the bullpen. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Celeste nodded. "I'm fine, but they're not." She turned toward the room, her voice calm but resonating like thunder. "I will see every one of you in court." Then she walked out, leaving behind a silence heavier than the slamming of any cell door. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because what happened that day wasn't just a mistake. It was a crack in a system she had long been fighting to expose. And now she had something better than evidence. She had proof, living, breathing, undeniable proof. And she was going to use it. Back at her apartment in Harlem that night, Celeste Monroe sat at her kitchen table, staring into a cup of lukewarm tea that had long since stopped steaming. She was calm, but not still. Inside, her mind was a roaring fire. What they did wasn't just personal, it was systemic. And now, it was provable. Across from her sat Derek Cole, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. He'd stayed, insisting on it. The usually buttoned-up Deputy Attorney General had a rare softness in his face tonight. "They didn't just mess with the wrong woman," he said. "They messed with the entire DOJ." Celeste didn't look up. "They're not afraid of the DOJ, not really. They've survived years of investigations, reports, recommendations. But this?" She finally met his eyes. "This gives us leverage." Derek nodded slowly. "They handed it to us on a platter." She set her tea down. "I want more than leverage. I want reform. Deep, wide, messy reform. No more task forces, no more press conferences. We take this to the courtroom and make it public. Then we'll need the right case." "Oh, I've got one," she said. "Mine." Derek studied her. "You're ready to be plaintiff and counsel." "If that's what it takes." Before he could answer, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Monroe." A male voice came through, low and clipped. "Ma'am, this is Sergeant Joel Thacker. I wasn't on duty during your detainment today, but I reviewed the footage." Celeste stiffened. "Go on." I think you need to see something. I'm not comfortable discussing it on a recorded line. I'd prefer to meet." Derek mouthed silently. "Do you know him?" Celeste shook her head. "Where?" "There's an old community rec center on 112th, back parking lot. Midnight." "You know that sounds shady as hell, right?" "I know, but so was what I found. Come alone." Click. Celeste set the phone down and looked at Derek. "You're not going alone," he said. "You're damn right I'm not." By midnight, Derek and Celeste were parked down the block from the rec center in a nondescript black SUV. The lot was empty except for one unmarked NYPD cruiser with no lights on. Celeste stepped out first, her heels crunching lightly on gravel. A figure emerged from the shadows. White, mid-40s, stocky build, badge clipped to his belt. Sergeant Thacker, she presumed. He raised both hands slightly like a silent peace offering. "You're brave for showing up," she said. "I'm not brave," he replied. I'm just tired of pretending I don't see it anymore." He reached into his coat slowly and pulled out a flash drive. This footage never made it into the system. It was deleted, or so they thought. Internal surveillance from the precinct, audio included. He handed it to her. "Why give this to me?" "Because what happened to you wasn't random. There's a file. A flag on your name. Internal directive says if you're ever spotted near any sensitive precinct zones, you're to be detained under suspicion. No probable cause needed." Celeste's pulse quickened. "You're saying I'm being monitored? Targeted?" Thacker nodded grimly. "Not just you. A list of people tied to civil litigation against the department. You're all on it. Some have been randomly stopped 6, 7 times. Quiet intimidation." Derek had stepped forward by now. "You understand the legal implications of what you're saying?" "I do," Thacker said. "I've made copies, stored them off-site. I'm not the only one who's tired." Celeste stared at the flash drive in her hand like it was radioactive. "You ever heard of an officer named William Dorsey?" she asked suddenly. Thacker hesitated. "Yeah, he was IA, fired for whistleblowing. Said the department had an unofficial watch list for activist attorneys and journalists." "He's the reason I joined the army instead of the force," Celeste murmured. "He tried to expose the system, got chewed up for it." Thacker shifted. "You're not him." "No," she said. "I'm louder." Back at her apartment, Derek loaded the drive onto his encrypted laptop. As the footage played, both of them leaned in, breath held. There it was, clear as day. Malloy and Kelsey reviewing a memo before heading out. A paper in Malloy's hand. Priority flag, subject Celeste Monroe. Disruptive legal threat. Then, "Let's make her life harder. A little scare never hurts. She walks too proud for someone who hates cops." Celeste froze. "That's the smoking gun," Derek said softly. "No," she corrected him. "That's the first bullet." The next morning, Celeste stood on the steps of the federal courthouse in Manhattan, flanked by Derek and a phalanx of reporters. The flash drive had been handed off to a trusted federal judge. The lawsuit paperwork had been filed before sunrise. "Do you have a statement, Miss Monroe?" a reporter shouted. Celeste stepped forward. "I was arrested without cause. I was silenced without explanation. But I will not be intimidated. Not now. Not ever." A ripple of camera shutters followed. "And to the officers who did this, your reckoning is coming. Not in secret, in court, on record, under oath." The press surged forward, shouting questions. But Celeste had said enough. She walked back down the courthouse steps, and in that moment, it wasn't just her stride that was unshaken. It was the entire foundation of their system starting to crack. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Reporters lined the back row, microphones and cameras aimed toward the front. A few whispered Celeste Monroe's name, while others jotted down notes about the surprise federal lawsuit that had sent shockwaves through the NYPD less than 24 hours ago. Celeste sat at the plaintiff's table, perfectly composed in a charcoal gray suit, her natural curls pulled back into a sleek bun. She looked neither angry nor triumphant, just ready. Beside her, Derek whispered, "You sure you want to cross-examine Malloy yourself?" She turned her head slightly, her voice steady. "He looked me in the eye when he cuffed me like a criminal. I want him to do it again, this time on the record." Across the aisle, Officer Greg Malloy sat stiffly, jaw clenched. His lawyer, a well-known defense bulldog named Susan Carpenter, leaned in to whisper something, but Malloy just nodded, his eyes flicking toward Celeste with a mixture of fear and resentment. The judge, a stern woman named Marjorie Klein, entered the courtroom and called the session to order. Derek rose. "Your Honor, we'd like to call Officer Greg Malloy to the stand." As Malloy took his seat, Carpenter stood. "Objection, Your Honor. We'd like to file a motion to quash the subpoena, citing active departmental investigation." Judge Klein didn't even blink. "Motion denied. Officer Malloy, please take the stand." Celeste rose slowly, the quiet hush in the courtroom thickening. She approached Malloy with the calm, predatory grace of someone who had waited too long for this moment. "Officer Malloy," she began, "on the morning of April 12th, you were one of 2 arresting officers outside Cafe Grove, correct?" He cleared his throat. "Correct. And can you describe the reason you detained me that morning?" Malloy hesitated, glancing at Carpenter, who gave a curt nod. "We were acting on suspicion based on a report from a local resident. Said there was a woman loitering, possibly casing the area." "And that woman was me?" "Yes." She stepped closer. "Did you verify that report before detaining me?" "It was a judgment call." "Did you ask for my name, identification, or give any explanation?" "No, we followed protocol." Celeste pulled a document from her file and held it up. "Is this the memo you reviewed that morning?" He shifted in his seat. "I can't confirm without seeing it." She handed it to the bailiff, who passed it over. Malloy scanned it, and his jaw twitched. "It is. So you did have prior knowledge of me before the alleged complaint?" His lawyer stood. "Objection. This line of questioning is inflammatory and assumes motive." Judge Klein raised an eyebrow. "Counselor, if your client reviewed that document, it goes directly to motive. Overruled." Celeste stepped even closer. "Let's be honest, Officer Malloy. You didn't arrest me because of a complaint. You arrested me because your department labeled me a disruptive legal threat. Isn't that correct?" Malloy's face flushed. "I acted on the information provided." "Which was?" "That you were flagged." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. "So you knew who I was," Celeste said quietly, "and you arrested me anyway, without a word." Malloy looked down. In the audience, a tall black man in a federal marshal's uniform crossed his arms. Celeste continued. "And when I asked why I was being detained, you said nothing. When I asked to see a supervisor, you said nothing, because your orders were clear. Silence me, intimidate me." She turned to the judge. "No further questions." Back at the plaintiff's table, Derek leaned in. "You got him. That moment when he admitted the flag, you got him." Celeste exhaled slowly. "It's not just about him. It's about the system that let him feel like it was normal." As court adjourned for lunch, Susan Carpenter approached them. Her expression was unreadable. "Monroe," she said, "just so you know, not everyone on our side thinks what happened was right." Celeste narrowed her eyes. "Then I expect a full confession tomorrow?" Carpenter gave a dry chuckle. "Don't push your luck, but don't be surprised if some of your next witnesses are cooperative." She walked away. Derek blinked. "What the hell was that?" "A crack," Celeste murmured. "The first crack in their wall." Later that afternoon, as Celeste walked out of the courthouse, the crowd outside erupted into a sea of voices. Supporters held signs. "Justice for Monroe. Accountability now. No more silence." But one voice broke through the noise. "Celeste! Celeste!" She turned. A woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a trembling hand stepped forward. My son was stopped 3 times last year. Same precinct. They said he looked like someone they were watching." Celeste nodded gently. "Write it down, every detail. You'll have a place in this case." The woman clutched her hand. "Thank you. Thank you for fighting." Celeste smiled, a sadness behind it. "I'm just getting started." That night, back in her apartment, her phone lit up again. Private number. She answered. A distorted voice said, "They're watching you." "Who is this? You need to be careful. You're not just making waves, you're making enemies. The line went dead. Derek looked up from the couch. What was that? Celeste stood still for a moment, then whispered, "Confirmation." Of what? That we're finally hitting the right nerve. The hallway outside the courtroom was colder than usual, both in temperature and tone. Reporters had been barred from entering the next session. Something big was coming, and the air was thick with the hush of withheld truth. Inside the federal courtroom, Celeste stood near the bench, eyes scanning the bench memo Judge Klein had just received in a sealed envelope. She could feel something shift in the judge's demeanor. A glance, a pause. "Ms. Monroe," Judge Klein said, peering over her glasses, "before we proceed with your next witness, the court has just received new documentation. Classified content, recently declassified by the DOJ as part of the internal probe into unlawful surveillance." Celeste's pulse quickened. She hadn't been informed of this development. Derek gave her a subtle nod across the aisle. It wasn't them. This was coming from above. The judge continued, "We'll recess for 10 minutes to allow counsel time to review the documents." Celeste stepped out into the side room where the sealed documents were waiting. As she scanned the first few pages, her hands stiffened. It wasn't just about her. There were names, dozens of them, Black community leaders, defense attorneys, investigative journalists, all flagged in the same internal NYPD database, codenamed Project Sentinel, each marked as high risk or influence threat. A knock at the door interrupted her focus. Derek stepped in, locking the door behind him. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" he asked, holding his own copy. Celeste swallowed. This isn't about one arrest. This is a pattern. A systemic plan to silence dissent under the pretense of public safety. "And now we've got proof," Derek whispered. Back in the courtroom, the audience was thinner. Security had quietly increased. Malloy was missing. Instead, a surprise witness sat at the defense's side, a man in a tailored gray suit, mid-50s, wearing a smug smirk and a gold lapel pin that screamed internal affairs. Celeste leaned toward the bailiff. "Who is that?" "Deputy Commissioner Vaughn Mathers," the bailiff replied quietly. "Came in 10 minutes ago with federal clearance." As Judge Klein resumed session, she looked pointedly toward the defense table. "I understand the defense is presenting a new witness. This had better be relevant." Susan Carpenter stood. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the arresting officer has submitted a psychological deferment due to stress. In his place, the department offers Deputy Commissioner Mathers to speak to protocol and context." Celeste didn't blink. "I have no objection. In fact, I insist he testify." The courtroom tightened. Mathers took the stand with the confidence of a man who'd survived 100 hearings and never once left with a bruise. Celeste approached. "Deputy Commissioner Mathers, are you familiar with a project called Sentinel?" The man chuckled. "Counselor, I've seen a lot of initiatives come and go. You'll need to be more specific." She placed a copy of the file on the evidence projector. "Does this refresh your memory?" The screen lit up with a black and white scan. Headers in red. Internal. NYPD Confidential. Below them, photos. Names. Flags. Mathers' jaw tensed for half a second. Just enough. Celeste continued. "Would you say this document reflects a lawful initiative?" "Classified documents can be taken out of context, Ms. Monroe. You of all people know that." "Then let's bring it into context." She clicked to the next slide. Her own photo appeared, alongside the phrase, "Recommend silent surveillance. If uncooperative, escalate." Gasps from the audience. A woman clutched her chest and sat down hard. "Why was I flagged, Commissioner?" He adjusted in his seat. Your work in dismantling prior wrongful conviction cases made you a point of interest, not a threat. And yet I was arrested without cause, denied a phone call, and surveilled for weeks before that arrest. How do you explain that?" His smile cracked. "I don't make tactical field decisions," Celeste leaned in, "but you gave the green light to the system that made them." He started to respond, but Judge Klein raised her hand. "I think we've heard enough for today." As the courtroom emptied, Carpenter pulled Mathers aside, whispering furiously. Derek joined Celeste at her side. "You just cracked their armor." Celeste's expression was unreadable. "We'll need more than cracks. We need it to collapse." That evening, Celeste met with a small group in a quiet Harlem community center. Journalists, lawyers, families of those wrongfully detained. She stood before them, exhausted but defiant. "They thought arresting me would be a message, but it backfired. What they didn't know," she said, pointing at the crowd, "is that my backup wasn't just one person. My backup is all of you." A hand shot up, a teenage boy, nervous but firm. "Do you think this will change anything?" Celeste paused. "Not unless we make it." And then she handed him the mic. The next morning, Celeste Monroe walked into the district attorney's office, not as a victim seeking redress, but as a woman on a mission to dismantle the rot from the inside. The leaked documents had started to circulate. Overnight, several local outlets published early reports about Project Sentinel, though redacted. The heat was growing, but not nearly fast enough. She took the elevator to the 10th floor. Each floor seemed quieter than the last, as if the building itself was holding its breath. When the doors opened, she found a welcome committee, sort of. Standing in front of her office were two men in suits. One had the polished stiffness of federal protocol. The other wore a badge clipped to his belt. "Ms. Monroe," the older one said, his voice low and even. "Agent Bryant, Department of Justice. This is Special Investigator Tim Reyes. Mind if we talk?" Celeste narrowed her eyes. "In my office." She let them in and closed the door behind them. "Is this about Sentinel?" Bryant nodded. "We've had eyes on pieces of it for months. Your arrest was the trigger we needed." "So I was bait?" "No. You were the red flag that forced people to start asking the right questions." Celeste folded her arms. "What do you want from me?" "We need access, every case file you can legally provide. Any anomaly, patterns, and you'll need protection." That last word hit differently. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning. Meanwhile, across town, Deputy Commissioner Mathers stood inside a private conference room at City Hall, facing a room full of grim faces, mayoral aides, legal advisors, a silent representative from Internal Affairs. He was cornered. "This thing is spiraling," one advisor barked. "You didn't tell us Monroe had connections with the DOJ." Mathers clenched his jaw. "She wasn't supposed to. We had eyes on her for months. Nothing stuck. You had her arrested. She was digging too close. Now she's got every eye in the state on you." Mathers walked to the window. "Then we need to discredit her. Find something. Anything. She's clean. Then plant something." The room went silent, even for this group that crossed a line. Back in her office, Celeste was dialing numbers, scanning files, and flipping through boxes of old cases. She was looking for connections, victims, names on the Sentinel list who had reached out before but were dismissed. One name stopped her: Jordan Ames. Wrongful possession. Case dropped. No follow-up. Arrested 3 times. No convictions. She pulled the file. A photo fell out. Jordan, mid-20s, standing with a public defender, bruised and handcuffed. There was a number scribbled on the back. She called. "Hello," a voice answered, cautious. "This is Celeste Monroe. I'm reopening your file." Silence. "I didn't think anyone would ever say that," he whispered. "Meet me at the Harlem Community Legal Center at 6. Come alone. Tell no one." That night, Celeste sat in a quiet room above the community center, waiting. At 6:07, the door creaked open. Jordan stepped in, thin, wary eyes, but a spark of something still alive behind them. "I kept everything," he said before she could speak. "Every file, every photo, even the police reports they tried to take from me. I knew one day someone would come asking." She leaned forward. "They flagged you. You were on the Sentinel list. You weren't paranoid." Jordan exhaled sharply, like he'd been holding that breath for years. Celeste reached out. "I need your help. I need someone who's lived it, someone who isn't afraid to speak. On record." He hesitated. "They'll come for me." "They already did. Now it's time we return the favor." The next day, news spread that Celeste Monroe had subpoenaed several high-ranking NYPD officials for a closed-door hearing. The city buzzed. She was no longer just defending herself. She was building a case. But trouble wasn't far. As she stepped into her car that night, the window beside her shattered with a pop. A warning shot, not meant to kill, but close enough to remind her that someone was watching. She ducked, heart hammering. A man in a hoodie sprinted from the alley. Her driver hit the gas. "Drive," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Fast." Later, inside her apartment, with reinforced locks and new security cams, Celeste sat on the edge of her bed, hands trembling. This wasn't just about a courtroom anymore. It was war. And she wasn't backing down. The hearing room inside the State Building in Lower Manhattan was colder than usual, the kind of chill that seemed intentional, meant to unsettle. But Celeste Monroe wasn't unsettled. She was armored. Wearing a sharp navy pantsuit and carrying a thick leather case filled with files and sworn testimonies, she entered the room like a storm. At the long oak table sat the city's legal counsel, 2 deputy commissioners, and 3 officers who had once laughed when she was arrested without a word. Today the silence was on them. The judge, a silver-haired woman named Evelyn Ramirez, glanced at the room through thin glasses. She had a reputation, blunt, fair, and impossible to intimidate. "We are here to review the legality of recent law enforcement practices and alleged abuse of power, particularly surrounding a classified initiative referred to as Project Sentinel. Ms. Monroe, you may proceed." Celeste stood, heart pounding but voice steady. "Your Honor, I bring before you not only documents but people who were targeted, silenced, and in some cases, nearly destroyed by a system that was weaponized against them." She turned toward the crowd. At the back of the room sat Jordan Ames, his eyes locked on her with something like gratitude. Celeste continued. "Project Sentinel was never just about profiling. It was about preemptive punishment. Innocent individuals, often black and brown, flagged as future threats without evidence, simply based on zip code, school records, or relatives with a criminal history." The deputy commissioner, Thomas Rourke, cleared his throat. "With all due respect, these programs were intended to protect public safety." "Then why was I flagged?" Celeste snapped, stepping closer. "Why was an assistant district attorney, one with no record, no ties to any criminal element, arrested in front of her neighbors without explanation?" Rourke's lips pressed into a thin line. Ramirez lifted an eyebrow. "Answer the question." He hesitated. "There was a data discrepancy." Celeste slammed a printed page on the table. "That's a lie, and here's proof. My name wasn't added by a database. It was added manually. Someone targeted me." Gasps rippled through the room. Ramirez peered at the page. "Who added her name?" That's when the twist dropped like a guillotine. Celeste pulled another document from her folder and handed it to the judge. The signature belongs to Chief Data Analyst Nolan Price, but the order came from Deputy Commissioner Mathers himself. The room exploded. Reporters scribbled frantically. A camera light flicked on in the hallway. Ramirez banged her gavel. "Order!" Mathers, seated off to the side, went pale. His lawyer leaned in, whispering, but Mathers shook his head slowly. He looked at Celeste like he'd just seen a ghost. "This is retaliation," he said weakly. "She's twisting it." Celeste leaned forward. "Then explain why you also ordered the deletion of 6 files tied to Sentinel targets, 2 of whom are now dead." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Outside the courtroom, things were unraveling fast. Public pressure had mounted. Hashtags like #Justice for Jordan and #Sentinel Exposed were trending nationally. Lawmakers began drafting emergency hearings. Protests were forming outside the NYPD's headquarters. Inside, Ramirez stood. "This court orders an immediate investigation into the conduct of Deputy Commissioner Mathers and all NYPD personnel connected to Project Sentinel. You are hereby placed under temporary suspension pending the outcome of the investigation." Mathers blinked like he'd been slapped. Celeste didn't celebrate. Not yet. Later that evening, back at her apartment, she stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The wind tugged gently at her braids. Miles away, the skyline shimmered. She wasn't satisfied. There were still officers on the street pulling people over for the way they looked. There were judges rubber-stamping warrants because the accused lived in the wrong neighborhood. And there were stories like Jordan's, hundreds of them, buried in manila folders and dusty archives. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Bryant, the DOJ agent. "Tomorrow, Federal Building, bring everything." Celeste turned back inside, poured herself a glass of water, and sat on the edge of her bed. She stared at a framed photo of her mother, another woman who had once fought for justice but never saw it win. "I'm not done," she whispered. In another part of town, Deputy Commissioner Mathers stood inside a private garage, pacing beside a black SUV. A man in shadows approached him. "You told me this woman was a low-level problem," the man said coldly. Mathers shook his head. "She was. Now she's a wildfire." "Then you should have buried it better." Mathers swallowed hard. "What do we do?" The man lit a cigarette. "You don't do anything. We'll take it from here." Back in her apartment, Celeste finally allowed herself a brief moment to rest, but only for a moment. Because the war wasn't over. It was just evolving. The air inside the Federal Building was thick with unease. Even the marble floors couldn't mute the urgency in every step. Celeste Monroe walked with a purpose, her heels striking the ground like a drumbeat. In her hand was a folder sealed with a red DOJ sticker. Her other hand gripped her phone, clutched tightly against her chest as if it were a weapon. Bryant met her at the security checkpoint, wearing a dark gray suit and a grim expression. "You're ready for this?" he asked. "I've been ready since they put cuffs on me in front of my building," Celeste replied. They rode the elevator in silence. It wasn't until they stepped into the room on the 27th floor, a glass conference room packed with federal attorneys, internal affairs officers, and 2 agents from the Civil Rights Division, that the magnitude of what was about to unfold truly hit her. Bryant nodded for her to begin. Celeste opened the folder and slid the documents across the table. "This is everything. The internal emails, deleted directives, reflagged records, and suppressed complaints. They built an entire parallel system meant to sidestep due process, all under the label of public safety." One of the DOJ agents, a tall black woman named Dana Holtz, flipped through the evidence. Her brow furrowed deeper with every page. She finally looked up. "This goes beyond misconduct," she said. "This is a conspiracy." Celeste's voice was low but clear. And it's still active. Mathers was only the visible face. Someone else is feeding the system. Someone bigger. Another agent leaned forward. Do you have any idea who? Celeste paused, then slid a flash drive across the table. I didn't. Until last night. Back at her apartment, she had run every file through a trace algorithm developed by a friend at MIT. A digital fingerprint had emerged, an administrative override linked to a clearance level above the NYPD and even above the local FB office. Homeland Security, Bryant had whispered when she showed him. Celeste shook her head. No, it's deeper. Private. In the conference room now, Dana inserted the drive. Within seconds, the screen showed a familiar name. Michael Zern, someone read aloud. Executive Director, Aegis Systems. Bryant blinked. They're a federal contractor. Celeste nodded. And the architects of Sentinel. They were feeding names into the system, manipulating arrest data, predicting risks. But more than that, they were monetizing it. The more threats they identified, the more funding they secured. It was profit-driven profiling. The room erupted in murmurs. You're telling me a private contractor has been manipulating law enforcement decisions for profit? An agent asked, incredulous. Celeste nodded. And using law enforcement as their weapon of execution. Dana stood, stone-faced. We'll need to move fast. Once Aegis knows we're onto them, they'll bury the rest. Outside, the streets buzzed with protest. A small crowd had gathered near City Hall, holding signs, chanting Celeste's name alongside demands for justice. Among them stood Jordan Ames, recording everything on his phone. What had started as one woman's wrongful arrest had snowballed into a full-blown movement. Back inside, the DOJ team moved into crisis mode. Calls were made, subpoenas issued, and by dusk, federal agents raided Aegis Systems' downtown office. But Celeste wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Later that night, as she returned to her apartment, she found her door ajar. She froze, quietly reaching for the pepper spray in her coat pocket. She pushed the door open. Inside, nothing was missing, but everything had been touched. A photo frame was slightly tilted. A drawer was left open, and on the kitchen counter was a plain white envelope. She opened it. Inside was a single line typed. You were warned. Stop digging. The breath caught in her throat. Her fingers trembled, but then her eyes narrowed. She grabbed her phone and called Bryant. They broke into my place. They left a message. Bryant cursed under his breath. We'll put someone on your door tonight. Stay with me or with someone you trust. No, Celeste said firmly. I'm not running, not when we're this close. Then at least let me call in the marshals. She didn't argue. Not this time. As she hung up and looked around her apartment, she realized something profound. They were scared. She wasn't just a nuisance to them anymore. She was a threat. Celeste walked to the window and stared out at the city. Somewhere in those lights, someone was watching her. But they didn't understand what she had become. She wasn't just seeking justice. She was justice. And come morning, she'd show them just how dangerous the truth could be. The courtroom was packed, elbows brushing shoulders, whispers coiling in every corner like smoke. Reporters clustered in the back, notebooks open, cameras prepped but forbidden to flash. The air was dense with tension, expectation, and something else. The possibility that justice might finally be visible. Celeste Monroe sat at the plaintiff's table, her posture tall, chin high. She wore a charcoal gray suit, not flashy but immaculately pressed, dignified. Bryant sat beside her, eyes scanning the defense team like a man waiting to see which wolves would break first. Across the aisle sat the real face of the operation. Michael Zern, head of Aegis Systems, flanked by two of the most expensive attorneys in New York. He wore a corporate smile, smug and cold. but behind that grin his hands were clenched just tightly enough to tremble. The judge, a black woman in her 50s named Honorable Linda Rowe, struck the gavel twice and called the room to order. This hearing will determine whether sufficient evidence exists to pursue a full federal inquiry into the conduct of Aegis Systems and its partnership with state and local law enforcement agencies. Celeste stood. Your Honor, we're prepared to present the evidence. And then it unfolded. Months of digging, layers of digital trails, testimony from whistleblowers who had once programmed the predictive algorithms, sworn statements from community members falsely arrested or harassed because their names appeared on a flawed data list. Every piece linked back to Aegis, and every link traced back to Prophet. When Celeste queued up the final video clip, the room went still. It showed Zern in a private shareholder briefing speaking plainly. As long as we control the data, we control the narrative. Fear sells, fear funds, and fear protects our bottom line. The silence afterward was heavy. Zern's attorney stood, objecting furiously. That video was obtained without warrant. But Judge Rowe raised her hand. You'll have your turn. Sit down. Celeste didn't need to look at the crowd to feel the shift. The courtroom was no longer a room of spectators. It had become a collective of witnesses. Outside, protests surged into a citywide wave. People gathered not just in New York, but in Chicago, Atlanta, Oakland, and D.C. They held signs with Celeste's name and others wrongfully profiled. The words were simple. We are watching now. Back in the courtroom, Judge Rowe looked at Zern. You will surrender all internal communications and grant DOJ full access to your systems for forensic examination. This court finds probable cause for a criminal investigation. Zern's expression cracked. The arrogance drained from his face. He glanced at his attorneys, then at the press, as if finally understanding that no amount of money would shield him from the truth anymore. As the gavel struck again, the room erupted, not in chaos, but in resolve. Celeste stepped outside to a wall of cheers and reporters. Flashbulbs exploded. Microphones rushed toward her. Celeste, how do you feel? Do you think justice has been served? What happens next? She held up her hand, commanding quiet not by force, but by presence. I didn't come here to be a symbol, she said. I came here because I was arrested for walking to work while black. I came here because I was denied the dignity every citizen deserves. But this isn't just about me. This is about every name in that database. Every person judged by an algorithm instead of a courtroom. Every life derailed quietly, without headlines or hashtags. She paused, looking out over the crowd. Justice doesn't happen in one courtroom or one day. It happens when we decide we're not afraid to be seen, when we stand up, speak out, and keep pushing, even when they tell us to sit down. Then she turned and walked down the courthouse steps, not as a victim, not even as a victor, but as something more dangerous to corruption than either. A believer. That night, Bryant met her on a rooftop bar downtown. The skyline glittered behind them like a constellation of unfinished promises. Did you ever think it would end like this? He asked. Celeste smiled. It hasn't ended. He clinked his glass against hers. No, but maybe it finally started. And far below, on the streets of the city she had once feared walking alone in, someone held up a cardboard sign with a hand-drawn message. Justice doesn't knock. It kicks the damn door open. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel, don't scroll past. Like, share, and subscribe to Voices Unheard. We bring light to stories that deserve to be seen. Your support helps us keep telling the truth, loud, raw, and real.